Okay, members of the Board of Trustees, Committee on Fiscal Affairs, please respond present when you hear your name. Chairperson Ferrer.
Here.
Vice Chairperson Mojica. Trustee Sunshine.
Present.
Trustee Berger.
Present.
Trustee Cortez Vasquez.
Present.
Professor John Verzani is the faculty rep.
Present.
Great. Professor Ned Benton is the faculty alternate.
Present.
Great. Timothy Hunter is the student rep. I don't see him yet. And Jonathan Hannon is the student alternate.
Present.
Great. So we have a quorum. This Public Committee on Fiscal Affairs is now called to order. Pursuant to the New York State Legislature's recent extension of the suspension of required in-person meetings, under the Open Meetings Law, this meeting is being held remotely via video conference with access to the public session available on the CUNY Board of Trustees website. A copy of the calendar agenda of items is also available online at the CUNY Board of Trustees website. Additional items may be added during the meeting, and as a reminder, please mute so we can ensure that everyone can hear. I will now take a roll call attendance for members of the Chancery and other invited guests. Members of the Chancery and other invited guests, please respond present when you hear your name. Chancellor Matos Rodriguez.
Present.
General Counsel and Senior Vice Chancellor for Legal Affairs, Derek Davis.
Present.
Executive Vice Chancellor and Chief Operating Officer, Hector Batista.
Presente.
Interim Executive Vice Chancellor and University Provost, Dan Lemons.
Present.
Interim Vice Chancellor and Chief Financial Officer, Christina Chiappa. Welcome in your new role.
Thank you. Present.
President Carol Mason is the COPS liaison. Catherine Abada, University Executive Budget Director.
Present.
Great. Vice Chancellor Richard White.
Present.
And I think Vice Chancellor Glenda Grace just joined us.
Correct. Thanks.
Great. It's all you, Freddie.
Let me unmute myself. We have a very brief agenda today, and it'll likely be an even briefer meeting. So I believe the first item on the agenda is approving the minutes of our last meeting. May I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Berger.
Is there a second?
Second, Hannon.
If there are no objections, the minutes will be deemed approved. First item on the agenda, would you call the item out?
Yes, I will. The first item is on the policy calendar. This policy item 2A is a resolution to approve a policy on academic excellence fees. Academic excellence fees are used to financially support the unique needs of a specific college, graduate programs, and degrees by increasing the quality of programs offered and adding value to student experiences. The university currently has practices and requirements on academic excellence fees. However, in order to continue to ensure that the fees are being spent and revenues are being used appropriately, these practices have been formally documented into a policy. The university is requesting the Board of Trustees to formally approve the policy on academic excellence fees.
I will move that we table this motion pending further study, and I do that in consultation not only with some of the members of the committee, but with the Chancellery as well. Is there a second?
Second, Hannon.
Is there any discussion on this? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Thank you. Next
Excellent.
item.
So with no more items on the policy calendar, next up are the information items, and there are two information items on the agenda. First is information item 3A, which is the fiscal year 2022 mid-year budget report. And Interim Vice Chancellor and Chief Financial Officer, Christina Chiappa, will make a presentation on the report. Christina, I gave you sharing privileges, so you should be able to share your screen.
Great. Thank you.
And I will note that we've been joined by President Mason, the COPS liaison.
Can I just confirm that everyone could see the PowerPoint? Yeah,
Yes, yes, we can see.
thank you. So thank you, Chair Pereira and Gail. I think we've done it this way a couple of times. So everyone has been sent the mid-year FY22 mid-year report. It's about a 55-page report, has lots of information. And instead of going through the details of the report, what we've been doing the last couple of years is really going through the highlights, in the PowerPoint. So I just want to take you through kind of where we are at the midpoint right now in FY22. So on the agenda, just quickly, we're going to talk about an overview for 22, the projections as of the midpoint of the year, federal stimulus funds, enrollment and tuition revenue, expenses, and just discuss a little bit about the future outlook, which talks a bit about where we see things going into 2023. So 22 continues really to be a year where CUNY continues to face financial adversity resulting from the pandemic. We continue to have some public funding reductions in 22 that we're experiencing. Loss in enrollment, related tuition revenue, has been something that's been an issue for the last couple of years and continues to be a concern in fiscal 22. We also experiencing increased related to pandemic, which are thankfully covered, by the stimulus funding that we're receiving. And 22 is also just a big year of change for CUNY in terms of managing the transition to coming back. And all the challenges and opportunity that COVID has brought to us. So overall for fiscal 22, we're projected to end the balance with a balance of about $104 million. That's about $2 million over last year. And really, we can contribute this really to the assistance that we're receiving from the federal stimulus funds, which are allowing most colleges, we have two that we'll talk about a little bit, that we're projecting right now would be in a positive. So we're really thankful for that. College by college, there's a lot of variability in financial strength and financial stress, and it has a lot to do with enrollment. As we've discussed here many times before, the enrollment at the community colleges we're seeing continued declines there. And we're also seeing some pressure from enrollment declines at the senior colleges. Again, large variabilities at the various senior colleges. Some are experiencing some enrollment decreases, and also some of the graduate professional schools. And we do have two colleges who right now are projected to have, on the scale of things, a smaller deficit. But the one thing I just want to say about the media report is we do tend to be a bit conservative at this point with our projections. It's only halfway through the year, and we plan on working really closely with not only these two campuses, but all the campuses to ensure, that they're using their money prudently, and that we close out the year in a positive or net position for all the campuses. In terms of, overall kind of resources year, we have about $3.9 billion university-wide. About 2.670 of that is, which is managed really at the college, and that does include tuition as well. Outside of the budget, we have about 1.2 million. And if you look at the orange kind of square there, you'll see that mostly that relates to things like fringe benefits. That's really the bulk of that amount that's managed outside, and also things like energy and building rentals. We include the prior year reserves of the 1.2 million, which I mentioned earlier in the resources. And this revenue above target is actually revenue below target. So the we're projecting that colleges are going to come below their revenue target by $83 million. And that really reduces the resources that are available. On the expense side, if PS, that's both a full-time and part-time staff and fringe is about, $3.3 million. So represents about 85% of expenses. So that's kind of a high level overview of that. If you look at this page, this is right after the summary and the mid-year report, you'll see this page, and it really shows the high level college by college, the resources and expenditures. And you will see the two red, the two colleges here that I mentioned earlier do have some projected balances, but we're going to, like I said before, we're going to work with them very closely to make sure they're maximizing their federal stimulus funds. And that, we hope that we could get them, into a positive position by the end of the year. So that's something that's, we're in discussions already and something that we definitely will be focusing on. So moving on to federal stimulus funds, which I'd mentioned before, how helpful they have been with closing out the year. So as we mentioned here before, CUNY had received 3 rounds of federal stimulus funds, institutional funds, and those funds, were allocated specifically by the federal government. We're projecting to use about 340 million of those funds in fiscal 22, and really on 2 main things. The first is really pandemic related expenses. So things like health and safety is a really big category of spending that we use. And this includes things like the COVID testing that we're doing. We're funding that type of thing from these, they're called HERF funds, higher education emergency relief funds, mental health services for students. We're continuing to buy PPE, masks, hand sanitizers, things like that. Training for faculty to enhance their proficiency in delivering instruction, online program development, student retention initiatives. A lot of colleges are spending a lot of money on that. And also support and investment in technology, which is something that we've used a lot of the federal funds to invest in. So that's kind of on the expense side. So you'll see we have some increased expenses, which you'll see a little bit later on related to pandemic. At this point, those are covered, from these funds. And the other piece of this, which helps us close out in the positive balance, is we're also allowed to use this money for revenue losses. And for the purposes of our discussion, that really relates to appropriation revenue loss. So that loss from the community colleges specifically have for this year, and also tuition revenue losses, which you can imagine, since we're having some real challenges there, that has been incredibly helpful to us. In terms of enrollment and tuition revenue, if you look at fall 2020 to fall 2021, we're down 9%. And you can see the breakdown, discussed before, but between the senior community college and the graduate and professional schools, with the biggest drop really in the community college. If you compare it to pre-pandemic, which the fall 2019, community colleges are down 27%, and you'll see the details in the report. Senior colleges are down 5%, and actually grad and professional schools are up 6%. So really what that translates in, so this decrease this year, really that translates to projected reduction in revenue from last year of $80 million. And again, the community colleges are very consistent that they have, decreases, although they vary quite a bit. But you'll see that they're down 52 million just in this last year. And I think they're over since the beginning of the pandemic, they're down 113 million. And senior colleges down 37.1. Just to talk about the variability a little bit, if you look at the senior colleges, we have one senior college, for instance, that has a decrease of 9 million. And on the other hand, one that has $5.4 million increase. So really almost a $15 million swing there. And it ranges from negative 15% to 3%. Some of that has to do with, some of the senior colleges are also comprehensive colleges. So that's a factor there. And, they're feeling some of the pain that community colleges are. And then there is definitely some growth that some of the senior colleges have graduate programs. We've been seeing that growth for the last couple of years in there, which has been helpful. In terms of community colleges, they all have had significant increases. It also ranges from 9 to 26%. And the dollar value, for this 1 year also ranges 1.2 to $22.7 million. So moving on a bit to expenses. Overall, we're projected to have an increase in expenses of 8% over last year, or about just under $200 million. If you recall, last year we actually had a decrease in expenses. So this is kind of bringing some of that back up a bit. On the personal service side, although we're down 664 positions due to attrition mostly, the expenses are up, and that's mostly related to collective bargaining and salary increments. On the OTPS side, we're projected to increase about 63% or 140 million, and about 67% of those are related to those pandemic expenses that I talked about and will be covered from the federal stimulus funds. And again, what I said, I said early on, our projections tend to, if you look back some of the history, our projections tend to be a bit conservative at the mid-year. So we're hoping some of this comes down, but that's kind of where we are at this point with the expenses. And this is just a little pie chart. And if you look at the three expenses related to PS, it's PS regular, which is the full-time staff, adjunct, and temporary staff, and those are loaded with fringe benefits. That comes out to that 85% that I talked about earlier. So continue on expenses, I just want to talk a little bit about staffing comparisons. So if you, again, compare fall 2020 to 21, we're down 664 positions, 3%. Estimated savings from that is about 74 million. If you compare it to the year before, 2019, which we consider pre-pandemic, we're down over 1,000, I think it's 1,045 positions. And that's really through attrition. These are full-time positions. Senior colleges contribute to this year's decrease of 664. They contribute 398 positions, 4%. And if you look at the various senior colleges, it really ranges, their decrease for this year, like between 2 and 6%. Graduates and professional schools, some of these schools I mentioned earlier had some increases, some pretty good increases in enrollment. So they also had some increases in staff. So really ranged from positive 6% to -2%. And community colleges are 216 positions, and they were down between 2 and 5%. Full-time faculty, which is a component of a piece of the 664, represents 149 positions, or 2% of that. All right, so that's really what I wanted to talk about for 22. And then I just want to spend just a little bit more time on just talking a little bit about kind of where we are so far in fiscal 23. I think overall, if you compare where we were last year to this year, in terms of state and city funding, we're definitely in a better position. So, the New York State, the executive budget was released, and it did provide some additional, operating aid and some other initiatives that we fully support. We are expected to get $59 million to close out the TAP gap. It was initially posed during the last year budget that this would be phased in over a period of time. But thankfully, we actually gained the full value of that this fiscal year, which is going to be very helpful to help the colleges which out and just operations, which is really where it's needed. We also received so far $53 million in new funding for full-time faculty. This can be used for both faculty at senior and community college. So that's also fantastic news. Another great piece of news is that, the TAP program really had focused on full-time staff, full-time students, up to this point. And now there's a proposal to extend that to part-time students, which is really going to have, we think, a really amazing impact on students, part-time students that go to CUNY. It should definitely help out with not only financing, students' education, but also hopefully with some enrollment and retention initiatives as well. So we're really looking forward to that. There will also be some nice impacts on the senior colleges, but community colleges will definitely see the bulk of that. And the last kind of just big good news thing that's so far is really the community college base aid funding. They actually set a floor so that, we get funded from the state on a FTE basis. And obviously that base has been going down. So they have agreed to kind of set a initial floor, which is helpful for us. So obviously it's early on in the process. And there's still a lot of work to do, but so far, like I said, we're definitely better now than we were a year ago, which is great news. So for New York City, they just also issued their preliminary budget, right? So they're a little more behind the state. The state's fiscal year starts April 1st, so they're kind of ahead where the city is, and the city has until they have a June 30th year, unlike we are. So they're on a little bit of a different path. So again, we in the preliminary plan, we are getting a reduction of the pandemic. We're getting a lot of those pandemic cuts back of $52.7 million. So it's a good start for us at both the city and state level. And finally, just, and I just wanted to mention a couple of things about, obviously enrollment is something that's all our mind and so tied to the financing of CUNY. And there's been a couple initiatives I just wanted to kind of highlight that, we've kind of worked on and used some federal stimulus funding to kind of focus on this area. One of them is the comeback program, which I know that you've heard a lot about before. But that was, about $100 million of debt that was forgiven. And we also used some federal stimulus funds to enhance mental health services. And, we also think that the additional money that we're going to get for the faculty is also going to have a positive impact there. So that's really kind of all I wanted to say today. So I just want to open up to see if anyone has questions or anything else.
Christina?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm sorry. And also the vice chair of the committee, Robert Mujica, has joined us. So
Okay.
Freddie had to go, everyone. So I will turn the meeting over to Robert, and I see a
Okay.
bunch of hands up.
Okay.
So you have
thank
in
you.
order Jonathan, Ned, and Henry.
Thank you, Gail, and thank you, Christina, for that. That was very informative. So let's go to questions. We'll start with Jonathan, who was first.
Thank you, Trustee Mahika. So my question about this is, have we looked at the analysis of this data in correspondence with how our colleges are in terms of diversity, that many of our colleges that are servicing underserviced populations, it seems that many of the colleges that service underserviced populations are all the ones that are having worse financial declines in terms of how we have been since fiscal year 2019, which is indicative of that many of our colleges are not doing correctly towards our underserviced students.
Let me thank you for pointing out, Jonathan. I mean, one of the things that I think you see in the pattern of particularly enrollment issues, I think they're tied up also with the pandemic. And we also know that the pandemic hit particularly the communities of colors and the neighborhoods where we have our population of color in the city in a particular dramatic way. And I think that you see some of that correlation with the geography of where some of our campuses are located, right? To the point that you're making. I think that for us, the enrollment scenario, obviously, and we're in the Committee of Fiscal Affairs, there is, we are concerned about the fiscal implications of that, of those numbers. But I think is the larger concern is about all the New Yorkers who normally, right, would have been coming to our community college, to our associate programs, and where we have been that door of opportunity that are now doing so and are not going to be able to help us in the economic recovery of the city. And that is my larger concern. I'm obviously concerned as a chancellor about the finances of the university, but our enrollment scenario is also part of the story about how we need to get the city back, right? Because those are the folks that may be because of health reasons, because of childcare reasons, because of financial reasons, might be on the fence from coming to the university. So, I mean, I think that the correlation is there. We've been trying to be supportive, particularly the community colleges, in their work with the DOE to create more of a pipeline. If you saw yesterday the announcement on the mayor's side, additional funding for the students who are English language learners with a program with CUNY, so that the students can mentor, right, the students and make sure that they come and they don't do summer melt. I think, and kudos to the governor for the part-time TAP. We know that the bulk of our part-time students go to the community colleges. So to the extent that, and I've talked to the community college presidents to be very mindful about that opportunity that we have in creating programs to attract those students that even maybe they become part-time, right, Jonathan? But then they can become full-time and come back to the university. So we share that concern, and I think part of the pattern that you're seeing is part of the pattern about how the pandemic hit communities of color in different ways, and how that has affected our university.
Thank you, Chancellor.
All right, next question will go to Professor Benton. Do you have any questions?
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I think the stunning number in this report is that the community colleges are down 27% fall 19 to this past fall. And I mean, that is just a jaw-dropping loss in enrollment of students that New York and New York State needs us to be serving those students. Those students need to be with us in CUNY, and we really, really need to focus on bringing enrollments back to the community colleges as a critical priority. And I know that our UFS chair went to a SUNY meeting about plans for next year. And the SUNY chancellor said that one of their goals is to try to increase their downstate enrollment, that they feel that there are students in New York City that would like to come to SUNY, and they're particularly focusing on their SUNY online program. And I think I think we need to be thinking about the competition, and we need to be focusing on what we're going to do to try to get our enrollments back at the community colleges. It's critically important for the students.
Yeah.
I don't know, Dan, do you want to mention some of the things we've been doing on the enrollment side? I mean, we concur, Professor Benton, and we began the first ever community college specific marketing campaign in the history of the university, when we began to see some of the softness in the numbers even prior to the pandemic. We also, in that campaign, particularly targeting, if you look deeper into those numbers, males, African-American males and Latino males are particularly subgroups that are not coming back to higher ed, and we did some marketing sort of like oriented towards that group with the community college presidents too. And I think, for example, you begin to see, I mean, one of the things that was challenging for us is that we had 5 new community college presidents coinciding with the beginning of the pandemic out of the 7. So I think that you're going to see now a group that is also now better in tune with their campus, with their recruiting base, their teams. You see the effects of leadership. For example, Kingsborough, that has been a little bit on the slide for a couple of years, the efforts from President Schrader that have been even highlighted nationally. You begin to see a little difference in the enrollment numbers there too. So it's all hands on deck on that component. I think in the community colleges, you have to navigate with care the online and in-person scenario, because we do know that the students can use the flexibility, right? But we also know that in some of the kinds of remedial programs and things like that, it is where some of the data about online not being so strong, right? So we need to be careful in pairing those programmatic needs. In the community colleges, we've been working on looking on the applied associates, which are the 2-year degrees that lead to employment. We created some new programs with the CEO Jobs Council, with apprenticeship in areas where there's demand. So we're trying to put all hands on deck on that sector. But we also know that the effects of the pandemic are real, right? And we're seeing it all over the city. But we share your concern, and are working very hard on that front. I mean, all across the university, but that's a sector that has been, like you said, more decimated. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just on the community college enrollment issue, because we addressed this last year. It's something that the committee is very focused on. We're focused on. It is not that also that SUNY is ahead of us on this. If anything, they've seen larger declines in community college enrollment at their colleges, right? And it's a trend that's been more than a decade in the making, although the pandemic has exacerbated and blown it up and made it a lot bigger, but it is something that we have to focus on. It's a national trend. We're seeing that it may be a change in how students are choosing to enroll in community colleges, and what's valued more. And then the online efforts of SUNY, Professor, as you mentioned, right, is an attempt, I think, on their side to address, right, perhaps a different way of enrolling students. But it's a good point, and it's something that we really do have to focus on, because those numbers are very large.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Berger.
First, a small detail question. On page 15, which deals with the year-end balances of reserves, the Graduate Center is burning through 90% of its reserves. And it was one of the areas where there didn't seem to be enrollment problems. Do we know what the cause of that is? Christina, do you know?
I am not sure, so I'm going to have to get back to you on that.
Okay. And the other question I have is on the city preliminary budget. I see they've restored some of the pandemic savings, not all, but some of the pandemic savings that we lost in the last 2 years. Are there any other additional funds in the mayor's preliminary budget from the city?
Yeah, we also received some funding for mandatory cost increases, about $23.9 million to fund collective bargaining, building rentals, and some fringes. So that was other good news.
but no additional programmatic money for ASAP or anything like that?
No, but I think that my understanding is that typically that doesn't come in the preliminary budget. We usually see that in executive budget. So I don't think we had expected anything.
Thank you.
Sure.
Trustee, we'll get back to you on the reserve issue. Professor Versani?
Thank you. Quick point. I know that I got a letter from the Graduate Center president saying they're had a loss of revenue due to not being able to rent out their building space, which put about $10 million. So that may still be an issue. My question's about the vaccine mandate and its impact on enrollment. We heard earlier from the chancellor that at the community college, the online model maybe isn't as effective, but with the vaccine mandate, about 30% of prospective students are sort of in the online as only option. And that's a policy decision that could be revisited. And I'm wondering if the state and or the board has any interest in looking at that I was a full supporter of it initially. I thought it was going to put a lot of social pressure on things, but unfortunately the politicization of our times has sort of saturated the level of vaccination that we're going to see. And it does have a direct impact on our potential enrollment.
It doesn't. Actually, I think Provost Lemon shared some numbers with me recently. So it is, it is something that has affected the enrollments, no doubt. I mean, I think it's a clear, correct public policy decision at the time of this public health emergency that we had. It might be also that, as many of the things that we're doing now with sort of moving out of the pandemic phase, that it might be revisited, but that's part of a larger conversation. But no doubt, Professor Versani, that has impacted our enrollment. I don't know if Dan wants to add anything to that.
So I think it would be helpful maybe just to know the numbers. The number of students that ultimately this spring were unenrolled from classes out of about 240,000 students was 1,900. So it was a very small, very, very small percentage of students that ultimately ended up not being enrolled because of the vaccine mandate. And another thing that I think is really important to understand, because we heard a lot about preferences that students have for online courses as opposed to in-person courses. We heard that repeatedly stated by students, faculty, and so on. In the end, it was very interesting to see that the percentage of students enrolled in online courses, the percentage of students enrolled in in-person courses, the percentage of students enrolled in hybrid courses was almost the same as the percentage of those courses that were offered. In other words, the filling of the seats in those courses matched the availability of the seats. And so we didn't see overwhelming evidence that students were not taking courses because they didn't have enough online offerings. We saw them pretty much registering courses in the percentages that they were offered. So I think that we had a lot of concerns about that would impact enrollment. The fact that we were really wanting to get students back on campus because we knew that for many of our students that was critical. And I'm sure that the professors in the meeting today would probably agree that for a lot of students, this has been really important for them to get back on campus and have contact with their professors directly, and also just to be a part of the physical campus where they begin to form that connection, particularly if they're freshmen or sophomores that had never even been on their CUNY campus.
Thank you. Just to be clear, I was talking about students that didn't come to CUNY because of the mandate, not those that did come, but I appreciate the answer.
Thank you, Professor Versani, for clarifying that. Okay, next we'll go to Mr. Hannon. Did you have a question?
Yes, so I wanted to follow up about the Graduate Center reserves before following up on something that was said by Professor Berzani. So to Trustee Berger's comment about the Graduate Center reserves, as a member of the Graduate Center Budget Committee, I would love to have a report about what happened to those reserves, because that would be very good information to know in order to know how to move forward. And to follow up on what Professor Berzani was saying about the online courses at SUNY, do we have a plan at CUNY for applying for accreditation for online programs within the university at our colleges? And regarding those online programs, would we have a short and long-term idea of the fiscal expenditures and or gains associated with those online programs?
On the graduate student reserves, I think we will get back right with the answer on the reserves that Professor Benton asked for earlier. And then, so we'll make sure you see that as well. And as it relates to, who can answer the relation as it relates to the accreditation issue for online learning?
So just know that we are looking into that. I mean, we want to. We also have an initiative that is being led by the expertise that we have in the School of Professional Studies in working with our campuses. We're using some of the stimulus money precisely so that we can expand the number of online programs that we have all across our campuses. Again, at the end of the day, what we want is the right mix, right? So the student, based on their success, how do they learn best, right? Convenience, the expertise of the faculty, right? The knowledge about the mix of the programs. We can have a mix of programs that then the students can make decisions about that. So we're using some of the stimulus funding to, under the guidance of SPS, who's won awards for the design of courses, because we want quality online courses to be developed, to be working in that direction to expand our capacity in that front.
Thank you, Chancellor.
Thank you, Chancellor.
Professor Benton.
Yes, there was, I think most of the faculty know there was a lot of unmet demand for online classes. And I mean, I think there are students who want to do online for a variety of reasons. They may want to do a couple campus-based classes and then do a couple online classes to fill out their schedule. And unfortunately, we were not able to allow ourselves to offer all of the online enrollment opportunities that students wanted. Now, we can think that the students would have done better if they were on campus, but there's a whole lot of students who didn't do anything, and they're not better off not enrolling in anything. And so I'm hoping that as we move forward to try to restore our enrollments, that we use more positive approaches. I think if we ought to, first of all, try to have the student at least enroll in something, and then we ought to try to encourage the student to enroll in face-to-face when the student really needs to do it. But we've got a lot to do.
Wonder if I could respond to that.
Please do. I was responding
Sure.
to you. You and I
Sure.
see things differently.
Mr. Lemons, let's go ahead and respond to Professor Ben, please.
So I agree with you. We want those students to enroll that didn't enroll, but we also want them to succeed. And if they enroll one term and they aren't successful and don't stay with the program and we don't retain them, that doesn't help anybody either. So I think what we want to do is have the right mix, and what we will be doing in terms of laying out the curriculum for the fall is having campuses make those determinations. What is the right mix of classes, right? There's no percentage that is being given to campuses, really, asking campuses to take all those things into consideration, Ned, that you're talking about. We want the students to come, we want them to succeed. And I think campuses, departments, along with deans, can really work at that and figure that out.
Thank you. Any other questions on item 3A, the mid-year budget report? Okay, hearing none, let's move to information item 3B, the fiscal matters information report. Interim Vice Chancellor Christina.
Hi, thank you. So this is just a report that we do every year. Every month. This month's report, there are a few waivers that are being requested from the school labor authorities. They have various partnerships with different unions and organizations, and they're requesting to have, if some of those students are out-of-state students, they're requesting to have their out-of-state tuition waived. And that's really kind of what the summary of the report is this month.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Any questions on the fiscal matters report? Okay, hearing none. We have no more items on the agenda. So I'm going to move to adjourn this meeting. Do I have a second? Seconded by Trustee Berger. So I move to adjourn the meeting. The meeting is now all in favor of adjourning.
Aye.
Aye. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Brian.
you.
Good
Thank you.
evening.
Bye.